All right, so we are now at, I think this is lecture number 92. I might be off by one or two. And we are studying part 3 of the Moreh Nevuchim. We are up to chapter 6. In chapters 1 through 5, the Rambam pointed out a lot of difficulties with the vision of Yecheskel, the vision of Ezekiel, which is known as the vision of the chariot, Maaseh Merkava. Now, if you recall, I just want to remind us, going way back to the beginning of Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam told us that the two main types of knowledge are called Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkava, right? Maaseh Bereshit meaning the accounts of Genesis, the accounts of creation, and Maaseh Merkava, the accounts of the chariot. And the Rambam emphasized several times, he said it is this in reference to Moshe Rabbeinu very explicitly, that that in order to get to Maaseh Merkava, in order to understand the account of the chariot, right? How the visions of God, you need to understand Maaseh Bereshit. You need to understand how the world works. And he showed how Moshe understood when he was standing at the top of Har Sinai receiving the Torah. Rambam explained to us that Moshe knew everything there was to know about the world, right? About everything, every scientific possible law he knew. And that through that he was able to comprehend the divine. So here now, when Ezekiel is telling us this Maaseh Merkava, the Rambam is dropping us tons and tons of hints that we have to look and understand Ezekiel's vision of God by using our knowledge of Maaseh Bereshit, by using our knowledge of how the world works and how science works, and especially what we learned a lot together from the Rambam, how he understood that the world works, through his Aristotelian physics, right? So he applied this to understanding a lot of the references in Ezekiel's vision, right? So that we understand what he means because we understand the science, right? So he explained to us how God, the emanations come from the first cause, which is God, through the higher spheres to the lower spheres to the lower spheres until it gets to us, and that enters our active intellect, and then from the outside world around us, we are influenced by the world where we see in our imaginative faculty, and that it's our job to take that active intellect and control the imaginative faculty rather than let the imaginative faculty run rampant on its own. And all those things, and the ideas of the spheres, he kind of put that all into Ezekiel's vision. We're going to continue a little bit more. We're going to finish today, Mirz Hashem, chapter 6 and 7. And after that, he's going to move on from this vision. But so I'm about to read chapter 6, which in the Pines edition, it's on page number 427. So know that the great and sublime notion that Ezekiel, peace be upon him, being moved by the prophetic motive force. Remember, Rambam explained to us how prophecy works, right? Prophecy is taking those emanations that we receive from the active intellect, right, and being able to understand them and perceive them without any selfish desires mixed in that skew how we receive it, right? So Ezekiel, by having been moved by the prophetic motive force, which is a force that the Rambam understood is coming from above, so to speak, that incited him to let us know this, began to teach us in describing the chariot, is the very notion that Isaiah, peace be upon him, let us know summarily without having the need to go into these details. Isaiah as well, let me pull this up, the famous chapter, Isaiah chapter 6, if you have it handy. Hold on, let me get it. Isaiah also has a vision of the chariot, but it's much, much less dramatic. Most of the drama is gone. As soon as my computer pulls it up, I'll read it to you. But basically, it says, Bishnas Mos Hamelech Uzziyahu, in the same year that the king Uzziyahu passed away, Vo'ere et Adonai, I saw my master, God, Yoshev al Kisei Ramanisa, sitting on a throne high and lofty, Vishulav Mileim es Haichal, and the skirts of his clothing was filling the heichal. Srafim omdim mima'alo. There were seraphim standing near him. Sheish knafayim, Metha had six wings. B'shtayim yichasepanav, with two he would cover his face. B'shtayim yichaser aglav, to his feet. B'shtayim yofef, and two he would fly. So very, very similar vision to Ezekiel. And then V'karzel Zevi Amar, they called Kadosh, 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 the nights of Os, Meloch La'aretz Kavodo, which we're all familiar with from the davening. So this, and that's pretty much the whole vision. I mean, there's more in the chapter there, but in terms of describing the this grand vision, it's the same thing, right? It's similar, but very, very brief. So now, because the Rambam feels, right, that he holds that the vision of the chariot is teaching us lessons, and we understand it only to the extent that we understand what I'm going to call science, for lack of a better term, right? It makes sense that Isaiah and Ezekiel would both be seeing the same thing, right? They be seeing representations that represent the basic ideas, the fundamental ways in which the universe works. So it makes sense. That's why Rambam is emphasizing this, that they saw the same thing. For he says, and I saw the Lord. I just read you that verse. The sages have explained all this to us. The Chazal have already told this to us and have called our attention to the subject, that it's the same vision. They said that the apprehension grasped by Yechezkel, Ezekiel, was identical with that grasped by Isaiah. They saw the same thing, right? They made about it a comparison with two men who saw the ruler, and Chazal have a famous a comparison. Isaiah being considered to have been on a higher level of prophecy than Ezekiel was, right? By Chazal, it's generally considered that way. So if you imagine two people see the king riding on his chariot, right? So the king goes on this big, fancy golden chariot drawn by these big, beautiful horses, and the horses are decorated, and he goes with a guard in front and the guard in back, and with the armor and the whole, and with trumpeters and all kinds of fanfare, right? The king goes. But one group that saw the king going was a group of desert nomads, and the other group was the people that live in the capital city, right? So the because the guy that lived in the capital city, he saw the same vision, but he said, I saw the king going in his chariot, right? That's what I saw. And then everyone in the city knows that he means, with all of the all the pomp and circumstance, right? But the desert nomad who never sees the king, right? He goes, oh my goodness, did you see that? He was on this and he was on that and this and that. It describes the gold and the chariots and the armor and the trumpets and the swords, and so it's the same thing with Isaiah and Ezekiel. And he said, I'm skipping a couple sentences because I just paraphrased. I referred to their dictum in Chagiga. All that was seen by Ezekiel was seen by Isaiah. Isaiah is like a city man who saw the king, whereas Ezekiel is like a villager who saw the king. It is possible that this text was interpreted by its author in accordance with what I have said at the beginning of the chapter. Namely, so what does he mean? That the contemporaries of Isaiah, the people that Isaiah was talking to, had no need of his expounding those details to them. He didn't have to explain all of the details, because the people that he's talking to were familiar with the concepts that he was trying to, that the visions of the chariot convey. Now, on the side, I want to mention that like, if you understand, if imagine a mystic, a Kabbalist learning Ezekiel, he would probably imagine that these are concepts, spiritual concepts and things that Ezekiel is describing, right? Which you and I really don't have access to. The Kabbalist might think or think that he has some access more than the average person, but it's a spiritual vision of things, in which case it's very likely that what you see and what I see are different, right? Whereas according to the Rambam, there's no spiritual plane above there upon which these things are happening. This is all just a vision, right? Nothing is actually happening, right? And what they're seeing is based on scientific principles, right? The wheels represent the galgalim, right? Represent the spheres, and so on and so forth. So therefore, they see the same thing because they're conveying the same principles. And then it makes sense to say that the people Isaiah is talking to already know those principles and don't need it. So Isaiah just has to remind us, I had a vision in which I saw God, right? God with all the stuff, with the angels, and that's enough on the throne, right? Which represents all these concepts and ideas. And in the next chapter, he's going to get to some of the basic concepts, some more that we didn't touch on yet. It is also possible that the author of this remark that the Chazal and Chagiga meant that Isaiah was more perfect than Ezekiel. Isaiah himself, right, was more perfect, and that the apprehension that amazed Ezekiel. So when Ezekiel heard, like if you and I were studying, the theory of relativity, right? Which, by the way, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've learned it and studied it and read it and had lectures on it at least 700 times, and I still don't really know and understand how it works, right? Which is probably true about most people, but whether they admit it or not, right? But there might be a moment where suddenly, like, poof, like it makes sense, right? And at that moment, it's wow. It did, and you go, this means this means. Oh, you mean so that means this? It's really cool. But if you're Albert Einstein and you walk around and you understand the concept of theory of relativity, he understood that pretty much every day since he figured it out, right? It wasn't like it's no great big deal. So he just says, yeah, the theory of relativity. He doesn't have to describe it and be in awe of it and everything, right? So Ezekiel and Isaiah were the same thing. Ezekiel was closer to you and I, and when he saw these incredible concepts, he just went and he comprehended it. He apprehended it. It made sense to him. All of a sudden, he just goes on and on with this wild and incredibly mysterious description. Whereas for Isaiah, these concepts were basic. So, I mean, he knew them and he understood them. So he just had to mention it quickly. So that ends chapter 6. I'm turning the page to chapter. I kind of paraphrase what Rambam says at the end. So chapter 7, he's going to point out a few things and a couple of interesting points. And this is the last one where he's going to directly keep quoting from the vision of the chariot. So, but there's a lot of cool stuff here. So to the whole of things requiring investigation. So Rambam likes to point out the difficult questions and subjects within Ezekiel's vision, right? And he pointed out many of them. And he's telling you to pay attention, but he's not going into the depth of it, but he might drop a little hint that might get you going in the direction he wants you to go in. So, and we've done that together the whole time. And the way I've been interpreting this whole time was when Rambam drops a hint, he's hinting to us, use what you know about Aristotelian physics to understand what Ezekiel is trying to say. That has been my approach. But the Rambam told us he wasn't going to directly do that. He told us that he was going to just give us some guidance. And if you don't know anything, all you'll read here is just a translation of the chapter. Chapter 7, he'll give us a few more hints. So one of the things you need to remember is one of the things that's important is when it's tied to a year, a month, and a day, and also to a place, right? If you recall, I'm sorry, I have to pull this up too. Ezekiel started his vision with describing exactly when it happened, right? And exactly where it happened, right? And the Rambam says, take that seriously. There's a reason for it, right? It means something. It's not just being stated. He started by Yibish Loshim Shana. It was in the 30th year, Baravi, in the 4th month, Bachamisha Lachodesh, on the 5th day of that month, Vani betoch Hagola, and I am in exile al Nahar Kivar, on the river Kivar. Now, all of these things are important, right? Now, Rambam is not going to tell us what's important about them, but I want you to think for a minute. In other places where somebody tells you, a time, right? I remember, on September 11th, 2001, I was in this place, and so the date obviously means something, right? If I tell you a certain time and a place, or if you're reading a good novelist, for example, right, they describe very clearly the nature, the place where the person is, and they describe when it happened, because those things are significant. This is something, Rambam says, the significance of which ought to be sought. You need to think about that. You need to investigate. Why are these days and months important? Rambam is not going to tell you what they are. But when you study this chapter on your own, start thinking, why is it important that it's in the 4th month of the year? What's significant about that month? Why is it significant that I've been in exile now for 30 years, right? What's the significance of the number 30 years? All of these things mean something. They're there to teach us something. It should not be thought that this is a matter without significance, that it's just randomly picked the date. To the things that ought to be considered, right? For it is the key to the whole, belongs to. And another thing you need to remember is when he started, he said, when such and such and such on this day, right? He started with the term, and I'm in the thing on this river, niftechu hashamayim, the heavens were open, vo'ereh maros Elohim, and I saw visions of God. This is something that frequently occurs in the speech of the prophets. I mean, the use of the figurative expressions of the opening and also the opening of gates. And he brings some examples. Why do you think that's important? Right? That the heavens were open. Right? So what he's trying to say, I believe, is the Rambam is hinting towards how he explained to us what prophecy is, right? Prophecy is those emanations that are coming from the first cause, right? Those emanations that are coming from above, right? That intellect, it's the force of the mind that is a prophecy. And remember, when Rambam talks about these emanations, he's talking about the way he believed the physical universe works, right? I have to emphasize a million times, because nowadays when we talk about emanations and stuff, we think about some kind of spiritual, Kabbalistic, mystical concept. The Rambam is talking Aristotelian physics. In other words, this is what he would have taught in a physics class, right? That when the heavens open, meaning they emanate to us and into our brain, right? And then we think. Now, it might sound a little crazy, but it's not, because if you think, it wouldn't be any different than I told you today, the scientific concept of energy, right? Right? The forces of energy, the neurons that are firing electrical impulses, that's energy that's happening in our brain, right? It's literally the same. It's a different scientific principle, of course, something the Rambam didn't have access to, had no idea what it was, but it's the same thing, right? The heavens being open means the forces of energy that come from up above that now give me these thoughts that I'm thinking. So among the things to which your attention ought to be directed, another thing is the fact that this whole description is based on, indubitably, on a vision of prophecy. And the hand of the Lord was there upon him, right? Obviously, it doesn't mean that God's hand was on him. It means that he was seeing a vision. And in this vision, there's very great difference in expression. There's an expression, and this is pretty cool. When he speaks of the living creatures, and remember before, if we go back 1 or 2 chapters that we studied last time, the living creatures were the intelligences. Remember, in Aristotelian physics, in order for something to move, some intelligence has to decide to make it move. That's how Aristotle understood movement happens. Movement happens when I decide I'm going to walk, and I walk. I decide I'm going to lift my hand, I lift my hand. If a mosquito decides to fly and land and bite me, it's because the mosquito has some level of intelligence that decided to fly. The reason why the heavens rotate is because there's angels that decide to make it rotate. Those angels, according to Rambam, are a force of nature, right? The force of nature that says, okay, the heavens are going to rotate, right? And remember, that's how he understood the heavens, not the way we understand them today. So when you're talking about those living creatures, you're talking about those aspects, those intelligences. Those intelligences don't have bodies. They don't have actual matter and form, right? Those are intelligences. They don't have matter and form. So therefore, whenever they describe those things, it says the likeness of the four living creatures. So it says the likeness of the firmament, the likeness of the throne, the likeness of an appearance of man. Because when it was referring to the intelligences, it couldn't say that they're not actual things that you and I could measure, right, or weigh, or right. Those are the intelligences. They don't have measurable quantities that we can see and describe. So whenever Ezekiel talked about those things, so here you see Rambam again applying his Aristotelian physics to the Maaseh Merkava. He's showing you how to apply his scientific knowledge to understanding Ezekiel. And then he says, however, with regard to the wheels, which the Rambam understood were galgalim, right, were the actual spheres, those are physical, actual things. They're way up there in the heaven, but they're actual physical things that we can see with our eyeballs. And if we could somehow reach them, we could feel them and touch them, right? So with regard to those, the wheels, it doesn't say anything about likeness, with the exception of where it said, but he makes absolute statements regarding what they really are in a form expressive of that which really exists, right? So, but be not misled, but when it says, and the four of the wheels had one likeness, that's different. He wasn't referring to the likeness of them, right? Their appearance. He was saying that they were the same, right? For this dictum is not ordered in the same way. It doesn't have the same significance. In the last apprehension, he corroborates and explains this notion at the end, because there he mentions the firmament, right? The heaven. Now, the firmament in the Rambam scheme is the highest sphere, beyond which is God's domain, right? Beyond which there is no space and time, right? It's so if the highest sphere, right, is beginning as he does with it and setting forth the details concerning it. He says, "Then I saw, and behold, in the firmament there was that was above the head of the cherubim. There appeared over them as if were a sapphire stone, as the appearance of the likeness of a throne." Thus, he speaks in this passage about the firmament in an absolute manner and doesn't say the likeness of the firmament as he spoke when he was talking about the likeness of the living creatures, right? So why is that, right? So he wants to point out this difference, that in one place when he talks about the firmament, he's talking about the now I'm going to suggest that what I think the Rambam is getting at here, but I don't know, I may be wrong, is that the firmament is that the dividing line between the what we can perceive as human beings and the place beyond that. And I say place as a metaphor, it's not an actual place, right? That we cannot perceive, that's godly, right? So the firmament, depending on the perspective, it could either be real or it could be not real. It could be one of those things that we can quantify and see and measure, or it could be one of those things that we can't. So that's what I think he's getting at, but I don't know. So as for the throne, he says there appeared over them the likeness of a throne. But then when he discusses the throne upon which God is, so to speak, sitting, this being a proof that the apprehension of the firmament came first. First, he saw that firmament, right? And then after that, there appeared to him over it the likeness of a throne, right? First, he saw that firmament, and then beyond that, there was the likeness. Beyond that, we don't see any actual thing. And in the vision, I see a likeness because specifically what I'm seeing in my vision, Isaiah and Ezekiel is telling us, is that I cannot actually see that stuff. So instead, my mind sees an image of something that portrays an idea as opposed to actually seeing a throne. And it's supposed so instead, like when you and I read it and we said, well, oh my goodness, what is it saying? God's sitting on a throne. Like, what is this? The Rambam is explaining to us that God's not sitting at the whole point is he's calling it the likeness of a throne because he's not actually seeing a throne. The throne is an image that he sees, which signifies an idea. Among the things to which another thing to which attention to be directed is in the fact that in the first apprehension, he states that the living creatures had both wings and hands of a man, whereas in the second, the living creatures are cherubim, which are humans, right? In the first, he only saw their wings, the hands only appearing in the second one. Remember, we read through together the 2 times ago as the first vision in chapter 1 of Ezekiel and the one in chapter 10 of Ezekiel. And there appeared in the cherubim the shape of a tavnit, of a man's hand under their wings. He said shape is analogous to saying likeness of demus, and this is under their wings. I honestly don't know exactly what he's getting at, but he's trying to point out something that you should think about. And if you thought about this enough, you'd come up with according to Rambam's pattern, an idea, a scientific idea that's being portrayed by Ezekiel in his vision here, and he's trying to teach us something about the world and how the world works. Consider also he makes an explicit statement, and the wheels were facing them, although he does not ascribe a form to them. He also says, and the appearance of a rainbow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. So I'm going to open this up in Ezekiel. This is, I think, verse like 28 or something like that. Hold on. This is near the end of that first vision. So he says, Kimare hakeshet, right? It was like the appearance of a rainbow, asher yiyev anon, which comes up in the clouds beyond Mageshem on a rainy day. Kain mar'eh hanoga saviv. So was the appearance of the shine that surrounded that surrounded that vision, which is Humare Demut Kivod Adonai, which is the appearance of the form of the honor of God. And I saw it, and I fell on my face. And I heard a voice speaking. So here, this is interesting because, first of all, we know that we know what a rainbow is. A rainbow is real, right? So he made it clear, right, that it was an appearance of a rainbow. It looked like a rainbow because he was trying to describe this shine, which can't be described. So the bottom line is that the Rambam is telling us that as Ezekiel gets closer and closer to describing God himself, and our primary difficulty when we read this chapter ourselves was, how could Ezekiel be describing a vision of God? That's heretical. How could that be? So the Rambam is saying he's making exactly the opposite point. What he's saying is that as I approach closer to seeing the vision of God, I can only use words of things that you and I can understand that are like it, that are comparable to it, that teach something about it. But actual it, with a capital I can't describe, right? So it's kind of like a rainbow and a shine and a glow. And then the next paragraph kind of tops it all off. Among the things which your attention should be drawn, it says the likeness of the man that was on the throne, right? Right? It says, but I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I was thinking of the next paragraph. So another thing is when he talks about the chashmal, right? That there was, he saw this chashmal. And what is chashmal, right? We, like everybody nowadays that speaks modern Hebrew thinks chashmal is electricity, right? But we know that chashmal, that's just the modern usage of the word. But no one knows what it actually means, but it's some kind of a shine or a glow. So the Rambam brings two explanations from Chazal. One is the word chash could mean fast, and mal could mean cutting, right? So chashmal would be like mal from the word of mila, right? For to cut. So if it means chashmal, then it's saying cutting quickly between two different notions, right? So above and below. So according to Rambam, chashmal would be a hint that there's cutting between the things that are above, the things that we cannot see and comprehend, in other words, the realm of God, versus the things below, which are the things that we can comprehend and measure. That's one possible meaning of the word chashmal. So here the Rambam tells you to look at it, and he also goes a little farther than he did before. They also give us a second hint, Chazal say, that sometimes chash means silent, and mal means to speak. At least in Aramaic, lemalel is to speak, right? So they ascribe the meaning silence. So speaking and silent, like those two things, right? There's allusion to two notions through the indication of speech. I'm turning the page without a sound. So there's talking, but there's no talking. There's no doubt their dictum. Sometimes they are silent and sometimes they are speak. Refers to a created thing. So chashmal is referring to something that you and I can see or know. Accordingly, on the third line, how they have made it quite clear to us that the likeness of a man that was on the throne and that was divided is not a parable referring to him who was exalted, but it's referring to a created thing. In other words, the image that they saw was the image of a human, right? But it's not an image of God, right? So accordingly, the prophet himself says this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God, right? He didn't even say it's the likeness of God. It was the likeness of the glory of God. In other words, what's the glory of God? That's when we perceive God's glory, we see it in a certain way. So the likeness was an image that was like what you and I perceive. So therefore, when he saw an image in the chair, he was talking about something that you and I can perceive. So accordingly, everything to which the parables contained, it refers as only the glory of God. Just like this, the whole chapter is referring to the kavod Hashem. The kavod Hashem, the glory of God, is what glory is only relevant when to the person who experiences that, right? We experience God's glory through the world that we live in. Those are real things. Those are not the glory of God is something real, something measurable, something that we see and feel. Understand this. We have thus given you also in this chapter such chapter headings that if you combine the headings there will emerge from them a whole that is useful with regard to this theme. So I gave you a whole lot to think about. Rambam says, think about all of these things, follow the leads that I gave you, and if you consider all that we have said, the greater part of its entire subject in question, except for a few slight details and repetitious speech whose meaning remains hidden, will become clear to you. You'll get it. So I gave you the guidance that you need. Think about all of these things, and then you'll understand. So here, and Rambam does this a lot, and really that's the purpose of this entire book. These few chapters are like a microcosm of the whole book, right? Remember, it's the guide for the perplexed. The perplexed person is a person that reads something in the Torah and doesn't understand it because modern science seems to tell him that it's something else, right? So the Rambam told us, look at this parsha in Ezekiel very carefully. Follow all these hints. Think about the things that click in your mind and tell you, there's something different here. There's something being said here. Why does he keep repeating the word the likeness? Why does he keep referring to the glory of God instead of God himself? Why does he give us a special date? Why? And now, and then do not hope after this chapter you will hear from me in a single word about this subject. I'm done with this. Be it an explicit statement or a flashlight illusion, right? I gave you this as an example. For everything that is possible to say has been said. I have plunged deep into this with temerity. I'm trying to do this carefully. We shall accordingly start upon other subject from among those that I hope I shall explain in this treatise. So we're going to start on a new topic in a minute. I want to point out something, if I'm repetitive, forgive me, but I think it's important. So do we now understand Ezekiel? I don't know. You can nod your head or say whatever. Not really, right? I don't think. I mean, do we have a little bit of a handle on if we really wanted to learn this chapter according to Rambam, how we would learn it? Absolutely, right? I think so. And now, so how has this, what the Rambam is teaching us, become incorporated in our religion, in the practice of our religion, and in the way we study? It has become really the paradigm for how we understand the Torah when we read it, right? When we read the Torah, we look at a verse and we say, well, why is the Torah telling me that happened on this day? Like, why does that matter? And we think about the significance of that day. Why does the Torah keep using this term over and over again? Why does the Torah seem to contradict itself? All of those questions are the questions that perplex us when we read it, right? And they're the ones that say, why does the Torah seem to contradict what I know about the world? It seems to be saying this, but I learned in my science and philosophy class yesterday something else, right? And when you ask, Rambam is telling you, ask yourself all those questions, right? Ask the questions that are difficult and think about it and start applying it. And it's going to open up the heavens, right? Remember, the heavens open, and all of a sudden the heavens will open, and that wisdom will come to you. And this is really the essence of the guide for the perplexed. These last 6-7 chapters, which are some of the most difficult to really think you can gain from, to me actually is everything, because when I read a parsha and I don't understand it, 99 times out of 100 I never fully really get it. But I use this when I learn Tanakh all the time. I ask myself the questions, the questions that are glaring from the text. I'm not afraid to ask, well, if the Torah says that the sun stood still, how could that be? Like, and then what is the meaning of that? What is he trying to say? Where did we use the same kind of language before? Maybe the language means something else. What kind of parable could he mean? Was this a vision? Was this real? All of these questions, and you keep asking yourself these questions, you will find an answer. And then all of a sudden you'll see what the lesson that the prophet is trying to teach us truly is. And every once in a while, you'll have that flash and you'll say, oh my goodness, I got it, right? This must be what he's saying. And that is how to learn. That is how a perplexed person is supposed to learn. And that is how we take Maseh Bereshit and we come to Maseh Merkava, right? We take the scientific knowledge and the physical knowledge that we know and the experiences that we have, and then all of a sudden we can get knowledge, which according to Rambam is a spiritual thing that comes from above. Knowledge will come when we use the faculties that we learned in this real world. This is a good stopping point for questions and answers before we hit the next chapter. So you guys can fire away if there's anybody has any comments. And if there aren't any, then I'm just going to go on. All right. So, and you can always stop me, as you guys know already. So chapter 8. So chapter 8 is, again, referencing another Aristotelian concept, and that is the idea of Homer and Surah, matter and form. It came up many times in this book so far, but in order to understand it, I'm going to review it quickly. According to Aristotle had to explain, and the Greek physicists had to explain the problem, right? What's the problem? The problem is that there's 4 types of matter. There's 4 elements in their world, right? Earth, water, fire, and air, right? So out of those 4 types of matter, why do we see all different shapes and forms? I see chairs, I see windows, I see couches, I see computers. Like, they all take different forms. I see human beings. So Aristotle, I don't know if he came up with the idea, but this was the way he explained it, was there's matter and there's form. There's a physical thing called form, and that thing called form basically takes over the matter and makes it into something. So me on the ground is basically the same thing. I'm just a pile of dirt, right? But the reason why this thing next to me is a pile of dirt and I'm a human is because the form of human came into this pile of dirt, and the form of pile of dirt went into that pile of dirt, right? So that's the form that makes it into something. And this is how they explain a lot of things. And you can imagine it's very simple to explain. Now, why does a human being then rot and become dirt, right? Why does the dirt sprout a seed and then give life and then it become a tree? How does one form of matter become another? So it's because it's the same matter with a different form, and that form gives it all of its characteristics, all of its what the Rambam has been calling accidents, right? Mikra, right? Which are really, I didn't like the term accidents. I like to use the term qualities or characteristics, right? So, okay, remember that, and now we'll understand what we're about to learn. And we're going to get a little bit into, Rambam didn't speak much about ethics in this book, but he's going to go on an ethical tangent in a minute. And you'll just have to go with his ethics, which are different than things a lot of our thinking today, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. So all bodies subject to generation and corruption are attained by corruption only because of their matter, right? So what is it that makes me turn into dirt after I die, right? Or the dirt turn into a tree, right? Or something gets corrupted, something, rots away, right? So it happens because the matter changed, right? With regard to the form and with respect to the latter's essence, they are not attained by corruption, but are permanent. The form human is a permanent form, right? It's in me, it's in you, it's in every other 8 billion people on the planet, right? But it's the matter that changes when a person passes away. So do you not see that all the specific forms are perpetual and permanent? There's always humans, right? There's always lions. There's always elephants, hopefully. So if the form exists, so that form that can take over matter and make it into an elephant exists. The elephant dies, so then he rots and becomes dirt. Corruption attains the form only by accident, right? So what makes it that all of a sudden this pile loses the form of elephant that it had, or one of us could lose the form of human? It's because of a characteristic. I mean, because it's being joined to matter. Because it happens to be that this form is attached to this pile of stuff, right? So since this form is attached to this pile of stuff, the stuff, right, is what gets ruined, and then the form has to go find something else. So the nature and the true reality of matter are such that it never ceases to be joined to privation, right? Hence, no form remains constantly in it. So the bottom line is that the nature of matter is such, right? And this is the characteristic. This is the accident. The nature of matter is such that it no one form can stay there forever. It's always going to be changing. For it perpetually puts off one form and puts on another. So here he brings an interesting comparison. We're probably going to only learn one side of this comparison today, but he's going to come back to the comparison of a woman or a wife specifically several times. But let me read. This is from Proverbs. Let me open that up. I'm sorry. Proverbs 6. That's Mishlei. And it's verse 26, right? So he has an interesting take on this verse, which, but let me, okay, I'm just picked it up. 26. So here he says, Kiva ad isha zona, right? For ad kikar lachem, for the, it's different ways to translate this, but I'm just reading from the Jewish Publication Society. The last loaf of bread will go for a harlot, ve'eshet ish, nefesh yikara tatzud, and a married woman will capture a precious soul. Okay, fine, whatever. So what does this mean? The Rambam has an interesting take on this. So let's read how the Rambam says this. Proverbs it will say all kinds of these, but they're proverbs, so people interpret them different ways. That's how proverbs work. So how extraordinary is what Solomon said in his wisdom when likening matter to a married harlot. So so the Rambam is therefore reading this pasuk very interestingly. This kikar lechem, right, is matter, right? So kiva ad isha zona, right? Kikar ad kikar lechem ve'eshes ish, and a married woman, right? So so the Rambam is understanding this to be referring to matter. And for matter is in no way found without form, and is consequently always like a married woman who is never separated from a man and is never free, right? So a married woman, right, is like matter that has the form attached to it, right? It's always there because matter always has to have some form, giving it some shape, whatever it is, whether it's a human or a piece of dirt. However, notwithstanding her being a married woman, she never ceases to seek. Remember, we're talking in this verse about a harlot, right? To seek for another man to substitute for her husband. And she deceives and draws him on in every way until he obtains from her what her husband used to obtain. This is the state of matter, right? For whatever form is found in it, does but prepare it to receive another form. The matter is always constantly looking to get another form. That's why every animal dies. And that's why every piece of dirt eventually becomes a tree. And every tree eventually becomes an acorn. And every acorn eventually becomes a squirrel. And so on. So it's everything is constantly changing. The same stuff constantly changing forms. So Rambam understands that verse. And I'm not exactly sure how he would translate it. I really don't know. But basically, you know, it's this the soul constantly, you know, bouncing forth from one man to another. So for whatever, okay, so and it does not cease to move with a view to putting off that form that is actually in it and to obtaining another form, and the self same state obtains after that other form is obtained active, and it keeps doing that. It has then become clear that all passing away and corruption or deficiency are solely due to matter. So why is it that matter throws off one form and takes another? It's because of matter. Anything that gets ruined, it's because of the matter gets ruined, because the matter is constantly trying to find another form. The form is fine. The matter is what's making all the problems. Thus, in the case of a man, for instance, it is clear that the deformity of his form, the fact that his limbs do not conform to their nature, and also the weakness, the cessation, and troubling all his functions, you know, that happens when we age, no matter whether all this be inherent in his natural constitution from its beginning, or be only a supervening accident, that all this is consequent upon his corrupt matter and not upon his form. Nothing changes to the person's form. The form of human is always the same. It's the matter that's getting worse and worse. Similarly, every living being dies and becomes ill solely because of its matter, not because of its form. So now he's going to go into that ethics that I was telling you about. All man's acts of disobedience and sins are consequent upon his matter and not upon his form. The reason why we sin is because our matter, right, our physical matter is thoroughly selfish, right? It's constantly looking out for what it wants, right? So, for example, man's apprehension of his creator, his mental representation of every intelligible, his control of his desire and his anger, his thought on what ought to be preferred and what avoided are all consequent upon his form. When we think in our mind, right, the perfection of the human, that's the form, right? The perfection of the human is the one who knows and understands the creator. He knows his purpose. He knows what he's supposed to do, right? That's because we have the form that tells us we are human beings. We are human beings that are supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to have all these good qualities, right? We're supposed to stay away from things that we don't want, that we shouldn't do, right? On the other hand, his eating and drinking and copulation and his passionate desire for these things, as well as his anger and bad habits, are all of them consequent upon his matter, because matter wants what matter wants, all of these physical things. Inasmuch as it is clear that this is so, and as according to what has been laid down by divine wisdom, it is impossible for matter to exist without form. So, because of the way God created the world, matter, which is so physical, can't exist unless it has that spiritual component, that form that gives it form. And for any of the forms in question to exist without matter. And the forms can't exist unless they have some matter within which to exist. So God made it that way. Rather than making a split and having perfection in one place and physical matter in another, God made it that we were married to each other. Literally, as Rambam explained, married before, as a metaphor. And as consequently, it was necessary that man's very noble form, which is the perfect human being, the way a person should be, the way a person should live, right? Which is the image of God in his likeness. Remember, he just talked about this when we talked about Ezekiel, right? But he also talked about this in much more detail way back in the beginning of the book, right? When we studied that together, where he says the image of God in his likeness is the fact that the human being has a rational faculty, right? He has the ability to think and do what's right, should be bound to earthy, turbid, and dark matter. God decided in his wisdom that noble, incredible human being has to be living in this ugly body, right? Now, mind you, this is very different than many other streams of thought in Judaism, but you have to take it for what it is, okay? This understanding is very different from Kabbalistic understanding. It's very different from many Musar understandings. It's very different from many of the other philosophers, and certainly modern philosophers. But we're reading Rambam now, so even if some of this might not rub you the right way, but this is how the Rambam understood it. So, which calls down upon man, right? Every imperfection and corruption. He granted it. I mean, the human form, power, dominion, rule, and control over matter. But however, God gave us, that human form, the ability to control it. We can rise above what the matter wants, right? In order that it subjugate it, quell its impulses, and bring it back to the best and most harmonious state that is possible. That is what we are supposed to be doing in this world. If we're supposed to be taking that human form and ruling over matter and making it. And what I'm specifically referring to is the different with the mystical way to look at it is that the Rambam understands that these desires as being something bad, right? The desires of matter as being something corrupt, something ugly, and that it's our job to suppress it, to quell it, to squash it, right? A much more dominant thought in Judaism today and over many of the past centuries is one that, not just in the mystical sources, there are other sources in Chazal that suggest this as well, but the mystics really brought this out, and especially the Hasidic movement really took mysticism, this aspect of it, to an even farther conclusion, and that is that it's not matter versus form, but it's rather all of these desires come from a holy place, right? And it's our job to direct them in the right direction, right? And that has become much more dominant in Jewish thought than the Rambam's idea. But again, we're learning Rambam now. I just wanted to point that out. So in this respect, the ranks of the Adamites differ. In other words, human beings, the Bnei Adam, right, are different. Among men, there are individuals who aspire always to prefer that it was most noble and to seek a state of perpetual permanence according to what is required. Actually, we're pretty much nearing the end. I think I'll stop here. And the rest of this chapter is going to take a little bit of time, but it's going to be very much a moral lecture. And it's going to throw us into the world of morality as viewed by those that followed this path, which is very much a path that came also from Aristotle. What the Rambam is explaining between matter and form very much comes from Aristotle, and there are many other great Jewish thinkers that take a similar path. And one of them is a book that I'm also thinking about teaching next. So I'm going to throw out a bunch of things. I already threw out the possibility of the Kuzari. And another earlier one is Chovot HaLevavo, The Duties of the Heart, is another book that's very basic Jewish philosophy. It takes a very similar approach to what Rambam is about to, and it's also very Aristotelian, but that's another book that's also a beautiful book and very, very important in the development of Jewish thought. And so I'm throwing those two choices. And I know I threw a couple months back, I mentioned maybe doing Zohar, which is very different. But those are all ideas. I know we still got at least a year to go probably, but I'm just, we'll have to take a vote when we get really close to the end as to what we do next. But if you learn Chovot HaLevavot, you'll see a lot of these similar ideas, and there's a lot of value into learning and understanding them. All right, so let me stop and open the floor for questions the last few minutes. Well, if there are no questions, then thank you for joining us. I appreciate that everyone was here. I hope you enjoyed the class and looking forward to next Wednesday, Mirz Hashem. I promise you that part 3, this entire section is going to throw at you a lot of food for thought. Oh, okay, we do have one question. Go ahead.
Just a comment, actually. Yeah, I think I remember from learning Tanakh that when Yeshaya said Bishnat Mot HaMelech Uziyahu was when he was, I think it's called abdicated or something like that, like because he got Sarat, not that he actually died.
That's
And
probably true. Yeah, Uziyahu was he was sent off to the side, like and
yeah,
his son.
he was Beit HaChofshit. It was like a
Yeah,
jail just outside of Jerusalem.
yeah, because he
Mm.
was a leper. Yeah, so the whether exactly when the people try to figure out the dates and so on, and that is one way of understanding that verse. Yeah. Um. 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 Yes, I'm just looking it up now. Yeah, Rashi says that right off the bat.
Okay.
I'm just gonna just see one or two others. Yeah, because he had Uziel was started off good and then he kind of went off. He got a little too haughty for himself.
Yeah.
But you can learn more about that, of course, on my podcast. Let the prophet speak.
Oh,
Any
okay.
other
Very good.
questions?
Yeshivas.
All right. Well, have a wonderful evening and looking forward to next week. And we'll learn some Maimonidean ethics. All right. Take care. Have a
Thanks, all.
wonderful evening. Yes. Bye.